Welcome to the second lesson of this tutorial series on how to use the Photon plugins to create multiplayer games in Unity. In the last video, I showed you how to set up your Unity project with the Photon plugin and establish a network connection to the master servers. In this video, I'm going to show you how to create a quick start matchmaking system from beginning to end. And after this, I'll provide this system as a downloadable Unity package that you can get off of our website. Also remember that if you need to check your work, you can find all of the code for this video in the related post on our website. Both of these links can be found in the description below. Now the first thing that I'd like to do is demonstrate this mechanic, so I'm going to click the play button. Here you can see I have just a simple menu with one button. When I click this button, you can see that it loads me into a new scene, and in the hierarchy you can see that I have one Photon player game object, which is this capsule object in the scene. Now I can run the same project in a standalone build, and when I click the button, it loads me into a new scene, and I have that same capsule object. But when I go back to the Unity editor, you can see now in the hierarchy I have two Photon player game objects. One of them is owned by this client in the editor, and the second is owned by the standalone build. The coolest part about this mechanic is that it only requires one click to be connected into a multiplayer game. You don't have to fill out any information to create or join a game. This mechanic is really great for mobile games such as Slither.io and Crash of Cars. So now let's create this system. So you should currently have a scene with a main camera, a directional light, and this network controller game object. The first thing that we'll do is focus on creating the UI for the menu system. For this, you need to create three UI buttons. The first one I've called loading, the second one I've called quick start, and the third one I've called quick cancel. For the text of the loading button, I've typed loading ... For the text of the quick start button, I've put play now. And for the text of the quick cancel button, I've just put cancel. For the loading button, we need to turn off the interactable option of the button component. For the quick start and cancel button, we need to disable these in the hierarchy. Now as far as customization, you can really do whatever you want with this menu system, but for the quick start mechanic, you need to have at least these three buttons. So now that we have our menu system created, let's start coding this mechanic. The first C# script that we need to create is our lobby controller, which I've called quick start lobby controller. We'll also need a script for our room controller, which I've called quick start room controller. Now let's go ahead and open these scripts up in our coding environment. We'll start within the lobby controller, and the first thing that we need to do is add two namespaces up the top. The first namespace is photon.pun and the second is photon.realtime. Next we need to change the script so that it's inheriting from monobehavior pun callbacks. Now we need to create some variables for the script, and we need three variables, and these are all private variables that I've made serialized fields. This is so that I can see them in the inspector. The first one is a game object called quick start button. The second one is a game object which I've called quick cancel button. And the third is an integer which I've called room size. Now as we walk through the script, I want to follow the order of execution. So let's quickly jump over to our network controller script so we can see where it all starts. In the start function of this script, we establish our network connection to the master servers. When we successfully establish that connection, the onConnectedToMaster function will be executed. We have this function right here in this script, but we can also call it in our lobby controller script. So here I have that same function onConnectedToMaster. And inside this function, we need to first set the automatically sync scene variable. So I have photon network.automatically sync scene equals true. We then need to enable the quick start button in the hierarchy. So I have quick start button.setActive, and I'm passing in true. At this point in our code, our game will just be idle waiting for an action from the user. The action that we want to provide to them is the click of the quick start button. So we need to create a function that we can then pair to the on click of this button. So here I've created this public void function which I've called quick start. Inside this function we need to disable the quick start button, so I have quick start button.setActive and I'm passing in false. We then need to enable the cancel button, so I have quick cancel button.setActive and I'm passing in true. The next thing that we need to do is try and join an existing game if one is available. So here I call photon network.joinRandomRoom, parentheses, and then semicolon. Now if no room exists or none are available, the onJoinRandomFailed callback function will be executed next. So here I have this public override void onJoinRandomFailed function. The parameters of this function are a short called return code and a string called message. Inside this function we can call a new function which I've named createRoom. So if we fail to join a room because none are available, then we want to try and create a room of our own. The createRoom function is a void function, and inside we first need to create a string that will be the name of our room. For this string we're going to randomize a number between 0 and 10,000. So here I have this local int variable called randomRoomNumber, and I'm setting it equal to random.range, and then for the minimum parameter I'm passing in a 0, and for the maximum parameter I'm passing in 10,000. We then need to set up the room options for this new room. So here I have room options and then room ops equals new room options parentheses, and then in curly braces I have is visible equals true, is open equals true, and max players equals parentheses byte and then room size. Now that we have our room options set up, we can try and create this room. So I have Photon network.createRoom. For the first parameter, we need to specify a name for this room, so I'm combining the string room with our random room number variable. The second parameter is our room options, so I'm passing in room ops. Now this createRoom function can either be successful and create a new room, or it can fail. If it fails, then it's going to call the createRoomFailed callback function. So here I have public override void, then createRoomFailed. The parameters for this function are a short called return code and a string called message. Inside this function, I'm going to try and create a room again by calling the createRoom function. The reason why I'm doing this is because if the Photon network.createRoom function fails, it's most likely because we've picked a name that already exists. And so if we re-randomize the name, chances are we won't pick another name that already exists. Now we'll handle the successful creation of a room in our room controller script, but before we do that, we need to create this public void quick cancel function. And this is the function that will pair to the onClick of our cancel button. Inside this function, we need to disable our cancel button, and so I have quick cancel button.setActive, and I'm passing in false. We then need to re-enable our start button, and so I have quick start button.setActive, and I'm passing in true. And the last thing that we need to do is disconnect from any room that we tried to join. And so I have Photon network.leaveRoom and then parentheses semicolon. Now that's everything that we need inside our lobby controller script. So let's go ahead and save this script, and then we'll go over to our room controller script. Inside our room controller script, the first thing that we need to do is add the using photon.pwn namespace up at the top. We then need to change the inheritance, and so here I've changed it to monobehavior pwn callbacks. The next thing that we need to do is create one variable. This variable is private variable, which I've made a serialized field, and it's an integer which I've called multiplayer scene index. The next thing that we need to do is make this script a callback target, and this is because we're going to be using a callback function in this script that's being triggered in our lobby controller script. So here I have public override void onEnable, and inside this function I have photon network.add callback target, and I'm passing in this. We can then copy this onEnable function and paste it below. I'm then going to change this from onEnable to onDisable, and we need to change add callback target to remove callback target. So now inside the script we need to handle a successful room creation, and we'll do this with the onJoinedRoom function. So here I have this public override void onJoinedRoom function, and this is the function that's being triggered in our lobby controller script. Now inside this function I'm calling a new function which I've named startGame, and I'm creating this function right here. Inside this function we first want to check to see if we are the master client. And so I have if photon network.isMaster client. If we are the master client, then we want to load into the multiplayer scene. So I have photon network.loadLevel, and I'm passing in our multiplayer scene index variable. Now because we set the automatically sync scene variable to true in our lobby controller script, any player that joins this room after our master client has loaded into the multiplayer scene will also be loaded into the multiplayer scene. So that's everything that we need for our room controller script, so let's go ahead and save this script. And then there's actually one more script that we need to create. Inside Unity, we're going to create this script, which is my game setup controller. Inside this script, we need to include using photon.pwn and using system.io up at the top. This script will be added to any of our multiplayer scenes, and in the start function, we want to call a new function which I've named createPlayer. And I'm creating this function right here. Inside this function, we just need to instantiate a networked object for each player. So I'm calling Photon network.instantiate. We then need to pass in the string location for the prefab that we want to instantiate. To do this, I'm calling path.combined, and I'm passing in two strings. The first is Photon prefabs, and the second is Photon player. We then need to specify the position of this object, which is just going to be vector3.0. We then need to specify the rotation, so I have quaternion.identity, and after this we can save the script and go back to Unity. Inside Unity, we need to create a new empty game object which I've named Quick Start Lobby Controller. We'll then attach our Quick Start Lobby Controller script to this object in the inspector. Then we need to set the variables of this script, so I'll get the start button of our menu system and I'll drag it into the start button field. I'll then get the cancel button and drag it into the cancel button field. We then need to set the room size, and I've set mine to 4. We then need to create another empty game object which I've called Quick Start Room Controller. You then need to attach the Quick Start Room Controller script to this object in the inspector, and we need to set the multiplayer scene index variable, which I've set to 1 because that's what the build index is going to be. And finally, we need to set the on-click event for our two buttons. And so I'll select our Quick Start button. I'll then click on this plus sign and I'll drag in our Quick Start Lobby Controller. We then want to use the drop-down menu and go to Quick Start Lobby Controller and Quick Start. We'll then do the same thing for our Quick Cancel button, but we'll use the drop-down menu to select Quick Start Lobby Controller and then Quick Cancel. Now that's everything that we need to do in this scene, so let's go ahead and save the scene, and I've saved mine as Quick Start Demo. You then need to create a new scene for your multiplayer scene, and so you'll go to File and then New Scene. Inside this scene, we need to create a new empty game object which I've called Game Setup. We'll then drag on our Game Setup controller script to the inspector, and after this we can go ahead and save this scene, which I've saved it as Multiplayer Scene. Now we just need to create our player prefab. So here I have this empty game object which I've called Photon Player, and it needs to be spelled exactly the same way as I have it spelled right here in our game setup script. On this empty game object, I've attached a Photon View component, and I've also added this capsule child object so that I can see it in our scene. You'll then need to make this a prefab in your resources folder. So here you'll need to create this resources folder, and I've also created this subfolder which I've called Photon Prefabs. And this folder needs to be spelled exactly the same way as I have it right here in our game setup script. So now that we have our player prefab created, let's set up the build order. So I'll go to File, Build Settings, and then inside this window we need to drag in our menu scene. So here I have my Quick Start Demo, and then our multiplayer scene. After all of this, we can then test our project, and you should be able to have two instances of your game connect to each other. And the way you can tell that this is working is if you have two Photon Player objects in your multiplayer scene. Now that's everything that we're going to cover in this lesson on how to create a quick start matchmaking system. If you like this video, make sure that you give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions, you can leave them in the comments below. You can also check your work by going to the related post for this video on our website. Now just a reminder, I'm also going to provide this quick start matchmaking system as a free download on our website. You can find both of these links, the related post and this download, in the description below this video. And finally, make sure that you subscribe to our channel so you can be up to date on all our latest videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.